We're the intersection of the nonprofit and profit communities, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. This Casey Cares episode is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis. Each month, we seek to bring our audience a discussion of topics many nonprofits grapple with, and we bring an expert, and this month is no exception. Joining our conversation today is Alana Muller. She is founder and CEO of Coffee Lunch Coffee, a company she created following an illustrious career here in Kansas City as an executive at Sprint and president of the Kauffman Fast Track Global Entrepreneur Training Program. With Coffee Lunch Coffee, Alana has focused on helping leaders build better, more productive professional relationships. There's a whole lot rolled into that. Alana's life purpose is to connect, inspire, and empower community. And what could be more relevant for nonprofits? Alana, thank you for joining us.
Oh, Ruth, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And we're going to roll into all kinds of things on this Ask the Expert. But I thought one of the places we could start is really the heart and soul of what you have made with Coffee Lunch Coffee, and that's networking. I think we hang that word and it means a lot of different things for people. So give us a kind of definition where you come from.
Sure. You know, it's funny. Years ago, I read an article. It was in the Harvard Business Review, and it described people's visceral reaction to the word networking as thinking, very negative, first of all, but thinking that essentially it meant you were trying to coerce people into doing things they didn't really want to do. So you're right. It has a very negative connotation. I come at it from a very, very different perspective. You know, I usually ask people, do you love networking? And I get very few shows of hands. But I have to tell you, I love it. I think that in this day and age, we cannot afford not to love networking, not to at least bring it into our life in some way, shape, or form. And so what I like to do is I like to reframe people's thoughts or definition around the word networking. And what I usually start with is what networking is not. And so I think it's good to get sort of those knots out of the way. The first knot is networking is not about money. And money, by the way, can be a really positive outcome of the networking process, but it is not about money. It is also not about finding a job. Although, and I know you and I are no exceptions, if you ask almost anybody, at some point in their lives, they have found an opportunity, a job, some sort of career advancing something as a result of knowing somebody else. And so it was either somebody they knew or somebody they knew. And so the sort of the referral process that we have in the professional world is often fostered by networking. And yet networking is also not about jobs. Networking is also not about sales, although often people will tell me that networking is so critical to sales, and it is. And by the way, I think we're all in sales. I don't think one has to have a sales or a business development title to actually be part of the sales community. We are every day trying to influence people to do things that we want them to do, whether that's buy our product and service or to convince our 5-year-old child, yes, you will wear pants to school today, right? So it's not, sales, again, sales can be a really positive outcome of networking, but in and of themselves, they are not networking. And additionally, what I typically see people do is they'll go to a networking event, and sometimes the intent is to collect as many business cards as possible. And while I love business cards, I think that they are a fabulous networking tool. The point of networking is not to collect a pocket full of other people's business cards. So those are the knots. You know, now that we've sort of set those aside, we can talk about what I believe networking is. And I usually frame it in terms of an equation. I was a math major, as you know, so it always feels better to me to think of networking in an equation. So my equation for networking is the sum of three things. The first is community. The second is connection. And the third is belonging. So the sum of community, connection, and belonging. Here's the deal. As human beings, we have a need in our soul. It is in our DNA to need connection. We crave connection. We are seeking connection everywhere we go. And frankly, it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert, we're seeking connection. And the way that we satisfy that need is we establish community everywhere we go. And so today, you and I, and we've been a community for a long time, you and I, Ruth, but but often we are creating community. So you and I today have created this little community. If we're in our neighborhood where our home or our apartment or condo is, we are in our neighborhood or community. If we go for coffee this morning with somebody, we are establishing community. If we hang out with the parents of the Little League players on our kids' team, we are creating community. So we are establishing community everywhere we go. And I think the reason we do this is that third piece. It is the belonging piece. We do this to feel a sense of belonging, to deepen our own sense of belonging. And by the way, it feels really good and really special to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. So now for our listeners today, I hope that as they think about networking, as they sort of set aside those negative feelings about networking, that instead they'll think of this equation as connections, community, and belonging. And remember, it's a human condition. We all need this. And so if we can reframe and refocus our attention on something positive about relationship building, I think we can generally all get on board.
I love the math equation, and I'm not a math fan. So thank you for making it simple and easy to follow, and not trigonometry, but more along the plus, plus, plus.
Yeah, exactly.
When we talk about networking the way you have defined it, a lot of people would get that in the quote business world. So how do you frame that in a kind of a nonprofit, and why would it be important in the nonprofit sector?
Oh my gosh, it's so important, and honestly, it's so important everywhere. And to me, I may come at the notion of nonprofit from a slightly different point of view. I think of nonprofit as really a different tax status than a corporation. This is all business, and I think that relationship building for any mission-driven organization, and mission-driven, whether you're in the nonprofit sector or in the for-profit sector, a mission organization has really a requirement, an obligation to convey that message, to honor the mission and to bring it to fruition. And you do that by establishing relationships, by reaching out to others, by engaging them in your mission, in your reason for being, and hopefully getting them on board. And, in the nonprofit sector, because frequently we are searching for funding, we're looking for whether it's donors or we're looking for grants. We have a need to not only share that mission with others, but hear from our donor community, our philanthropic community, what they want to see from our organization. And you do that by having conversations, by listening to people and hearing what they have to say. And so I think the establishment of relationships, the nurturing of relationships it's so critical, again, in any sector, but certainly in the nonprofit sector.
You make it sound so simple, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but very simple. Yet I think for some leaders of nonprofits, or even line people, they go, "Oh my gosh, but how do I start? What do I do?"
Yeah.
How do you start?
Oh my gosh, there are several ways. So the first way is that if you're not sure who to connect with, there's so many events. And here in Kansas City, we are sort of blessed with more events than we can even attend, not just on any given day, but any week, any month, and certainly throughout the year. So one way just to simply meet people is to show up, is to go to events, whether it's speaker opportunities or just cocktail receptions, networking receptions, informational sessions about different organizations. There are plenty of ways that we can get involved in the community. And I always think, by the way, that it's a really good idea to get involved in organizations that are not your own, not only so that you can see what's going on with them, but so that they can see what's going on with you. You can tell them with pride about what you're working on, the mission of your organization, and let them see you in action. And so I think that simply by showing up, that's one really easy way to do it. Another thing is that once you do sort of identify individuals, people that you think would be interesting to talk with, people who you think you could help, by the way, not just can they help you, but can you help them? begin by reaching out. As I said, this is a human activity. And so we all need these connections. You certainly have plenty to offer anybody, just as much or more so than they have to offer you. So remembering that, I think, is really important. From a tactical perspective, I usually encourage people to make a set of lists. And I have kind of these standard lists that I encourage. The first one is what I call the people you already know, your the people who are already in your relationship base. So list number one, you can document anybody who you are committing to connecting with, say in the next 30 days, the next 90 days, whatever it is. And by the way, we all know thousands of people, so it doesn't have to be daunting. I suggest that people start by making a list of maybe five people who they want to re-engage with. And frankly, it could be somebody you saw this morning at the gym. It could be your dear old Aunt Sally that you haven't seen in 12 Thanksgivings, whatever it is. It could be somebody that you knew from high school, from college, an old neighbor, an old professor, maybe an old coach, anybody who you want to reconnect with, and certainly business connections. And the reason for getting together can be that you have a specific question to ask them. You want to learn about their career journey. You want to hear more about their organization, or frankly, you just want to catch up, right? There doesn't have to be any reason at all. And so make that first list, a list of people you already know. The second list is a list of people that you don't know. So, sort of similar, but kind of the opposite of that list number one. List number two is sometimes more difficult to create because you don't know who you don't know. But you may have heard their name, you may have read an article about them, perhaps seen them speak, or maybe you don't know that their first and last name, but you know the type of person they are, the type of organization that they're part of. And what's really beautiful is that if you've made that list number one, you can mention to the people on list number one that you're trying to connect with the people on list number two. And very frequently, those individuals know the people on list number two and are willing to make introductions or help you find a path to connecting with those people. So I would say start with those two lists as a way to really jumpstart the process. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that once you make it through list number one, keep going. Right? Once you make it through list number two, keep going. You keep adding to that bottom of that list. So once you've made it through your first five people on either list number one or list number two, keep it up, add five more people, and commit to really connecting with those individuals and finding ways to meet with them, either one-on-one or in the context of a networking event.
Those are great. All right. Tell us a little bit about the etiquette. Once you've done this, we hear in the business community, try to send a personal note,
yes.
Use LinkedIn, all this. So you're the pro. Give us a little inside scoop on, how we should then manage these. Let's say once we've met with someone, how often is too often to keep up with someone, for example?
Right. Well, so on that question, we're all busy. I know almost no one who would say that they have free time, right? We all have 24 hours in our day and we are filling them up. And so, so first of all, be mindful that everybody's busy. However, I do think you're right. I think that there's a particular etiquette that's really important to follow. When you meet with somebody, especially if they've done a kindness for you, if they've made a referral, a suggestion, if they've listened to your story, even if they haven't, I think it's a really good idea to write a handwritten thank you note or just a handwritten note. It was so nice to reconnect with you. It was so great to see you. Thank you so much for coffee, whatever it is. And there's something about that handwritten aspect. I don't care what people's handwriting looks like. I know for some, this feels like an old-fashioned process, but I'll tell you what, receiving what we call today snail mail still makes people feel good. And sort of seeing your name handwritten across an envelope, it just, does something to get your heart going. You read that letter, your heart sort of explodes with happiness. You put the letter back and you place it on the corner of your desk where it sits for no fewer than 3 weeks, because it turns out people don't throw away handwritten correspondence. The other thing is that if the person hasn't placed it on the corner of their desk where it's sitting for 3 weeks, they have lovingly tacked it to their bulletin board where now it's artwork and it is never coming down. So the thing about handwritten correspondence is that it is like receiving a gift. And the thing about it on the flip side is that for you, the sender of that handwritten correspondence, here's what it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you 2 minutes of your time, and time is money. So I know that is actually meaningful, expensive, all those things, but let's set aside those 2 minutes. The hard costs, it's going to be the cost of the paper. All right. So I can tell our listeners today that I often will buy stationery in bulk from Amazon. It costs 19 cents a piece. It's not gorgeous, but it's a little card with an envelope and it works. It will cost you also the price of a pen. And my hot take for today is that the pens at the banks are free. So if you need a pen, drop by your favorite branch and you can get a pen for free. If you don't like the bank pens, drop by any hotel and they will gladly give you a pen with their logo on it. So pens are relatively easy to come by. It will cost you the price of a stamp. And I think as of this taping today, I think stamps might be at 61 cents a piece. So I'm sorry for that. There's nothing I can do about that. So there's a small cost, but boy, on the receiving end, it is like an old MasterCard commercial. It is priceless. And I very much recommend that people send handwritten correspondence. You also asked about LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's a really great choice. And when you do reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, if you're not yet connected with them, when you do reach out for that initial connection, please include a little personalized note. Remind the person how they know you. You know, we met at the XYZ event, or our mutual friend Ruth suggested that I reach out to you. Give people a reason to want to say yes to that connection. If you're already connected, you can certainly send a message through LinkedIn. My one word of caution is sort of the digital correspondence. I have to say, anybody who knows me well, including you, and I know that you've experienced this with me, my very worst, and I have many, but my very worst professional trait is I'm not great with email. I manage 3 very active email accounts. I get over 200 messages a day. Yes, a lot of them are spam, but a lot of them are not spam. And I am not good at managing that. So sometimes I miss emails. And it's not just sometimes. I am embarrassed to tell you, frequently I miss emails. And so email gets lost. And so by sending a handwritten correspondence to show your appreciation, you're showing a real commitment to the relationship, and it's something that will be remembered.
And I have to tell you, Alana writes the best notes. So if you haven't encountered Alana in your journey, whether it's nonprofit, profit, whatever, I have Alana notes that you're right. I can't throw them away, because if it's a really crummy day, it's whip out that note. Okay, I can move forward. I just want to retouch with our audience. We're talking with Alana Muller. She is the founder of Coffee Lunch Coffee. Little secret as we talk about networking, Alana does not drink coffee. So what kind of tip can you share about where to meet somebody?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I think folks kind of grapple, well, where's the appropriate place and what do I really ask? You know, when is it appropriate to say meet you for drinks versus meet you for a beverage? Or
okay, so yeah, I know you let the cat out of the bag. You let my little secret.
I know, I'm so sorry.
So the name of my company, as you've shared with our listeners today, is Coffee Lunch Coffee. And honestly, that was just sort of a little joke for me. Years ago, when I was in career transition, I realized I needed to figure out what I wanted to be next, who I wanted to be next from a career perspective. And so I thought that if I structured my days around the days of the people that I wanted to connect with, that eventually they would say yes to me. So the way that I structured my day was to have a morning meeting time slot, a midday meeting time slot, and an afternoon meeting time slot. And so I called that morning, midday, and afternoon as a joke. I called it Coffee Lunch Coffee, and it stuck. And the thing was, when I gave people options for when to meet with me, what it did is it advanced the process much more quickly. So if I reached out and I said, Ruth, I'd love to are you available to get together for a cup of coffee or for some lunch? You know what I'm talking about. And it doesn't matter what's in the cup. I don't care what's in the cup. The notion is, if you structure regular dedicated time in your day to connect with other people, you will be a magnet for others who want to connect with you. And you are sort of time blocking so that you can make sure that you really are intentional about fostering those relationships. What I don't want our listeners today to feel stressed out about is that notion of coffee, lunch, coffee. It doesn't have to be coffee, lunch, coffee. That is my job. That is what I do. And frankly, sometimes it's coffee, coffee, lunch, coffee, drinks, dinner, right? So sometimes that does happen, but it doesn't have to feel daunting. For our listeners today, what I encourage everybody to do is come up with a scheme that works for you, some sort of structure that works for you. And if your goal is to have one connection per week, great. I can't tell you what your number ought to be. For me, it's at least 3 a day. For others, it's 1 a week. For still others, it's fewer than that or more than that. It sort of depends on your goals, your ambitions, your aspirations. Sort of the way you structure your lifestyle is the right way for this to work out. And so what I suggest to people is, in the professional world, I do think that breakfast is a good option. I think coffee any time of day is a good option. It doesn't have to actually be coffee. As Ruth knows, I'm very well caffeinated, but it's not coffee. I drink a lot of tea, a lot of tea. So it really doesn't matter what's in the cup. Lunch is a really good option. What becomes a little trickier is when you start talking about drinks and dinner. I want people to be mindful of the optics of drinks and dinner. And by the way, I love drinks and dinner, and I'm doing a lot of drinks and dinner. But I often think that it takes actually knowing somebody a little bit better, having more of a connection with somebody before you want to sort of venture into the drinks and dinner, because that begins to weigh into people's personal time. And so you have to think about, what does that look like? If it's more than 2 of you, then I think drinks and dinner are fair game. If it's just 2 of you, especially if it's a male and a female, I just think to be mindful of the optics of that from a professional perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know each other well, go for it. Go for it. I really do think it, especially, and Ruth knows this, especially when the holiday season comes around. And by holiday season, I'm referring, in the United States at least, to the day after Thanksgiving to the day after New Year's Day. There's something that happens in people's minds and their psyche where they're willing to sort of leave at about 4:30 in the afternoon for what I call a glass of holiday cheer. And that glass of holiday cheer might be a really gorgeous club soda with a lemon. That is fine, but there's just something about people's willingness to leave sort of a little bit early in the day to go for what we would say a drink. And so I think that keep in mind that if you want to structure your day around the days of other people, during the primary part of the year, I think coffee, lunch, coffee is a really good choice for you. Maybe it's bagels and pizza. I don't know. Come up with something that works for you. But especially during that last half of the year, think about adding that 4th time of day, which would be drinks. And I think that that's fair game, really, for any connection.
So you've made those lists, you've made those connections, you have an opportunity to meet, you send that handwritten note. Let's talk about the essence of the meeting itself. Something that I've run into is meeting with someone and I pull out my laptop and I'm taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that find that very off-putting. Like, yeah. Oh, I'm going to be on my computer checking my text messages and everything. So can you give us a little insight there?
Yeah, there's actually a body of research that comes out of the University of Kansas that suggests against devices, even whether it's a phone, a laptop, a tablet, one of those electronic notepads. There's this body of work that suggests it's not a good idea because it makes people feel like there's a wall between you. And again, it's sort of a psychological thing, but even a phone on a table, and by the way, I am notorious for having my phone out on the table. I usually have it face down, but there's something about it once you pick it up, there's a wall, however artificial, that's been drawn between you and your person. And so I'm still a fan of the good old fashioned notebook or notepad or note card. There's Ruth showing me hers, which I love. I still think there's some value to that. Although I have to admit, especially in this world of virtual connections, virtual meetings, virtual coffee, I use my computer. I have 2 screens that I'm working off of, looking at you on one screen, typing on the other screen, because it's more efficient for me. I type faster than I can write. It's helpful to have it in a digital format, so it's always available to me. So I understand sort of that desire to have an electronic way to capture notes. Just be mindful of sort of the message you're sending. If it's a meeting, if it's a business meeting, I do think that having a laptop is okay, but still, there's a lot of encouragement, especially, as I said, this research that was done at the University of Kansas that encourages, no devices, only paper, to make it feel much more personal.
Well, we'll take a tip from you and say maybe the best thing is to say as you sit down, would you mind if I just take some notes on my computer? It makes it easier for me. The person tells you no. I guess you just have to say, okay, and have a piece of paper there.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think, being upfront about it sort of shows that transparency too. So that's a great tip.
So you have the meeting, you take those notes, you send the thank you note. How much follow-up should there kind of be?
Yeah, I think it depends what you talked about. If you committed to providing a referral, some information, the name of a restaurant, the name of a book, the name of a website, some information, any kind of information, please, please, please follow up. I think in the heat of the moment, we all mean it. We all say, oh, I'm going to send you that thing. I'm going to send you the name of that person. I'm going to send you that phone number. And then we walk out the door and life goes on and we forget that we've made this commitment. I do this every single day, and it makes me feel ashamed and sad and sorry and apologetic. And yet I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't mean to forget, but as we just talked about, everybody's busy. And so for any of us, if we can sort of honor those commitments, not only will we show the person that we care, that this is an important relationship, that, I don't want to jeopardize this connection, but it shows that we have the capacity for follow through. And we are, I think, earning what I call social capital that money can't buy. And by social capital, I mean, basically, I call it relationship money. It's sort of our reputation, how people think of us. You don't want somebody to say, oh, you know what? That Alana, she's real nice, but she never follows through on her commitments. I never want somebody to say that about me. And in fact, just last week, I ran into somebody who I had promised a bunch of information to, two referrals, some sample documents, a bunch of stuff, and I forgot. And I saw her and I could just feel the heat in my face rise. And I ran back to my computer and I sent her a note, so nice to see you this morning. Seeing you reminded me that I never sent you that information. And so the thing is, I'm sure she's still happy and appreciative that I sent it, but I was embarrassed that I hadn't. So I think that if you promise something, send it as quickly as possible. Send that thank you note as quickly as possible. If you forgot, 3 weeks later, it's still okay to send that thank you note. It's still just fine. After that, I think it kind of depends on the nature of the relationship. If you're my grandmother, you want to hear from me every single day. If you're anybody else, you probably don't. And so, what I say is understand your audience, know your audience, honor the audience. If you think that a monthly correspondence is in order, calendar it so that it's monthly. If it should be quarterly, fine. If it's once a year, great. The thing is, if your connection the first time is authentic, it will be authentic the next time and the time after that. And so the idea is that be respectful of people's time, because as we've already discussed several times on this call or this conversation, we're all busy people and we're not waiting by the phone for one another, but we do want to know that we matter in one another's lives. And so do that follow up and be certain to connect with people and in a periodic way that makes sense for your relationship.
Well, I want to make sure our audience knows where they can go to find out all this kind of information and all the other stuff that you do. We didn't even hit your expertise in strategy. So maybe you'll have to come back as an Ask the Expert and we'll dig into that. So best place for us to find all the stuff is where?
Well, I'd love for people to come visit me at coffeelunchcoffee.com, and you can learn about the various products and services that we offer at Coffee Lunch Coffee. And I'd love to hear from people. So people can also feel free to look me up on LinkedIn at Alana Muller. And I hope to connect with many of our listeners today.
Alana, as always, such a joy to talk with you and pick your brain.
Great to see you, Ruth.
Thank you for joining us on Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications, which is also a nonprofit. This Casey Cares segment was brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, www.kaufman.org. If you'd like to be a guest on Casey Cares or underwriting opportunities, you can visit our website, which is kccaresonline.org. And spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio and on Instagram at Casey Cares Online. Don't forget, you can catch us Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. on ESPN 1510 a.m. and 94.5 FM. Thank you for joining us on Casey Cares.